in class, apparently. The title or the topic tonight is Face to Face with Greatness, and to be honest, I actually don't believe in this title because I use the word ordinary in front of families, and I don't think that's the case with who we have here today. So, how extraordinary families raise extraordinary youth. Let's start here. Some of you, this will be a repeat, but I want to go a little bit deeper into the story that I've been telling this week to staff and to the students in my class. So, high school, I was one of those annoying students that just did well in class without seemingly having to put a lot of effort into it. I found that I could look at a sheet of paper right before a test and walk in and I could remember what was on it, and so it was easy to just sort of fill out a test after I just looked at it. So I had really good short-term memory, and that was my secret weapon. But I started to realize, or at least have a sneaky suspicion, that I was getting grades based on my reputation instead of my performance. And I decided I was going to run a test one time. So in one of my classes I was assigned a report, and I thought, I wonder if she's even reading this. Because I worked really hard at the beginning of the year, and I found that if I did that, then I pretty much got easy grades all through the year. Like, it was my reputation. And so I started the report really strong, and I ended it really strong. And in the middle, I just filled in a bunch of gibberish and make it sense. And I got it back, and at the top of the paper, sure enough, there was an A. And I thought, okay, it's a game. I'm just going to learn how to play the game and do what the teacher wants. And that's just what school means, right? But as I look back on that now, you know, I can define a few different things. I can see it in bigger context, because then I was just happy that I was getting away with something, right? That nobody else had figured this game out. And you know, I look back now, I can see that school became a performance for me. I was there to perform for the teacher, to do what they wanted in order to get the grade that validated that I was complying. Right? So, went through high school, one of the top students in my class, got a scholarship, went through university, sort of with this same approach. It's just about performance. But underneath that performance was a boy that was very insecure about this facade that he was creating, because he didn't really think that he was that smart. He was just playing the game better than anybody else. And so there was always this sneaking fear that he was going to be found out and exposed. Then who would he be, right? So after I was done with graduate school, I learned about this idea of leadership education. And it felt like such a freeing moment in my life, because I could finally get an education that mattered, and I could be authentic, and I didn't have to perform. It was me becoming something that mattered. It was about me transforming and growing and forming into something that was who I was supposed to be. And so that idea really lit me up on fire. And so I went, not formally, but I went back to school to get the real education, the one that I should have got to begin with. And so I bring that to my class right now. And that idea of a performance is still sort of a psychological burden that I carry. Because in some ways I think it might limit my mentoring, because I'm so worried that they're going to perform it for me instead of take this seriously and be authentic and, you know, make these assignments mean something for you. So I don't always, I worry about stepping into an authority position, because you perform for authority. And so I don't always call them out when I need to call them out, or call them up, I guess. Maybe a better way to say that, right? So I'm working on becoming a better mentor, and adding that to my tool belt, but in the meantime, performing. What I didn't know then, also, as I started to learn about history, was that was actually part of the time that I was born and raised in. It was a common characteristic of that time. Last time we talked about generational archetypes. And I used this sine wave to kind of show the cycles of history, and then I can overlay what's going on through history as well as how the generations interact, because each one of these is 4 generations. You divide that sine wave up into 4, and that's a repeating cycle over and over and over again. So if the culmination of this 100-year cycle is a crisis, the last one that we identified was World War II. The one before that was the Civil War. And then the one before that was the American Revolution. So if you just do the math, every 80 to 100 years, there is this big crisis that sort of forces society to reset and rebuild. And that goes through, after we rebuild, and we start to question that building, that height, then we start to fight, and then we get into another crisis. So this just happens over and over and over again. So adding 80 to 100 years, then where does that put us from 1945? 80 to 100 years is 2045. So, and if you look at what happens during a crisis, there are common patterns that show about when it begins and things that happen. So you can kind of go micro study and figure out what happened in the crisis. And even if you do that, it sort of lines up that we're somewhere here. Like the last real thing to happen in this crisis is whatever this big crisis event. The last 3 have been wars. Hasn't always been that in history. It could be pandemic, could be natural disaster, whatever might cause us to have to pull together, become united again, get through it, and then rebuild.
The second coming.
So we all hope.
We can hope. So last time we talked about how there is an interrelation between generations, and we started to understand why sometimes it can be hard to relate to the generation that's growing. Right? So we have during a crisis period, then that's when the artist generation is born. During a founding is when the prophet generation is born. During an awakening is the nomads, and then during an unraveling is the heroes. And each of these generations have a healthy role, that if they fulfill this role, then this seculum, this 100-year period, is a healthy one for freedom and prosperity. So if they fulfill their roles, which is the prophets are here to warn, the nomads protect, the heroes rebuild, and then the artists tell a story. So the prophets, they call us back. They're born during this founding, and in the awakening, they're trying to call us back to what are the basic principles that we should be aligned with and adopting and living like. The nomads are things starting to shift for them, so they are born here, but they come of age during this unraveling where there's more chaos, people are starting to argue, and so they are really there to protect what's good and right and true. And then the heroes are the ones that are born during the unraveling, come of age during the crisis, so they're usually the ones that end up being on the battlefields and getting us through that crisis. And then when they're done, they help to rebuild. And then the artists, they tell the story of this rebuilding. You know, what are the basic principles and values that we're going to adopt when we rebuild this structure? They tell stories through the art, through stories, through sculpture, through music, that then keeps that story alive for the next 3 generations. So, I know we've covered that before Christmas, so hopefully this is a review, right? These generations also have a distorted role. So this is their strength and their primary role, but they can be distracted into their distorted role. And if they do that, then the saeculum is not happy. It's not good. There is instability. So a prophet, instead of warning, if they become a zealot or zealous, so like there's one cause or one narrow thing that they're really pushing, and everything else has to kind of conform to that. If that could be the lead to instability. The nomad, instead of protecting from the danger, they just want to escape and go find their place in the mountains until everything's over, then they can come back out, right? That's not a good role for the nomad to follow. The hero rebuilds these structures, and if the structure takes a life on its own, they can really believe more in the bureaucracy that's created in the systems rather than rebuilding and making or having that institution fulfill its actual purpose. And then artists, instead of telling the story, they can really fall into fragility and just kind of be, I don't know what to do. So hopefully that's kind of a review. I want to go a little bit deeper into this cycle to talk about this time period right here. Because if this is where we are in the crisis, it's probably too late for our homes to really influence what happens here and how we get up. But it's just the right timing for what's coming after that, which is where I really try to focus, especially with this generation. So what do we do in our homes to influence the health of this next family, this next time, all right? Any questions or comments or concerns? We good? On the same page? All right? Okay. I'm gonna erase some of this. So the question we can do, what we can do is look at the past foundings or highs and try to see how healthy they were or were not, and then understand how we might be able to influence that, the next one. So, going to introduce a couple of terms to help me really analyze this. All right, mantic, sophic, and sophistic. These are Greek terms that describe a worldview or a set of values or a standard, okay? And you'll recognize these, maybe I use some more familiar words. So mantic is our orientation. It has to do with worship, with the sacred. Probably the most common word we can relate to it is revelation, right? So how are we oriented? What's our value system? What are we holding as sacred? What are we worshiping? How are we getting information that maybe is beyond our own thinking and our own thoughts? That's the mantic aspect or element. Sophic is our structure. So this is law, reason, institutions. Okay, so this is more, what can we think through for ourselves? What can we reason? What structures are we building? So is the structure strong, and is it oriented the right way to make this a really healthy cycle? Sophistic is a distortion of both, one or the other. So it will take one of these that are values and try to minimize it or push it to its excess and go too far. So it'll sort of make fun of revelation, or it will take reason to its extreme, for example, right? So let me give you a couple examples. It'll take justice, for example, which is a really important value, and instead turn it to vengeance. So it might be, today we see cancel culture or judgmental social media, or whatever that might be, right? Justice, compassion, can be turned into coercion. So, you really need to support this policy, because if you don't, it's because you hate people, right? Or you're not compassionate, or you don't care for this population that it's supposed to try to support. It could be a mantic or Sophic value of order and turning that into control, for example. So what we find in these cycles is during the founding, the mantic and the Sophic sort of rise to power, you would say, or rise to importance. And then slowly as we go through the cycle, those fall and the Sophistic rises. So here we feel like we're getting pushed into different camps. You have to choose one or the other. Are you a conservative or are you a liberal? And are you a believer or are you a non-believer? Are you red state or are you blue state? And it tries to force us to conform to one of those two options, when most of the time they're sort of false options or false choices. Right? So the Sophistic increases instability. The mantic is meant to stabilize. So when I was growing up, born here, getting educated here, the Sophistic was rising, which is performance culture, right? It's about the facade, it's about how you're appearing, rather than character and being authentic. And that wasn't just me. A lot of people getting caught up in that. So what I noticed is during the American Revolution, the mantic and the Sophic were pretty strong. So that was a really good founding. The Sophic led a little bit more than the mantic with the Enlightenment, and everyone was studying that time period. Here, after the Civil War. This was one where the Sophic was stronger because we had so much government trying to resolve slavery, for example, right? So the Mantic took a step back because that wasn't a compelling reason, right? God says we should not have slaves. Well, it wasn't a message that was being heard. And so the government had to kind of step in and be a little bit stronger there. Here we had a little bit more Mantic and a little less Sophic. So they were both there, but they were smaller than this one. Okay. So the question is, how do we get a really strong Mantic and a really strong Sophic when we live in a time of sophistry and the sophistic? All right. Just too intellectual, it might be. She shook her head, no.
It's good. It's good.
Give me some feedback. What's on your minds as I'm sharing this? Yeah.
So earlier this week, there was some news. The head of AI security at AI Safety, I think was his title, at Anthropic.
Uh-huh.
They're the company that behind Claude, one of the big AI companies. He just resigned, and when he left, he wrote a big letter to all his colleagues, and it was published in the Wall Street Journal. And he said, essentially, I've been trying for years to get security built into these systems, but nobody will listen. Nobody will, and he made a comment. He's like, our society is doomed, is in peril, and we've all accepted that through our actions and our behavior. And he's like, so I'm moving to the north of England and I'm gonna focus on poetry. Like that was like, it was just like, I'm done with all this.
Wow. Washing my hands.
So it's interesting, like, to think about where does that put us in proximity to the crisis versus the reset period.
Yeah.
And his opinion, that's somebody that's in a position to see a lot coming down the pike.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, we're beyond the point of no return.
Mm.
And that correlates highly. I think it was ChatGPT was owned by OpenAI. Just the week prior to that started allowing advertisement on ChatGPT. So now corporations can essentially influence the results that you get from prompts in their system
Interesting.
to persuade you one way or another, right? So it just, you can see the whole thing where we have something that could be this amazing tool and further humanity is we've just said, we don't care about that, we care about making money and pushing what we believe to be important instead of what's right.
Yeah, very much the sophistic approach. Right.
I've noticed that, I feel like there's a little bit of a greater divide than there used to be. But there are people who feel very interested in both the Mantic and the Sophic and are fighting, sacrificing a lot in order, focusing their whole life and dedicating their life to both of those. Sometimes more the one, sometimes more the other, but in a lot of cases, both of them. And I feel like that feels like a much smaller proportion of people than the other proportion of people that don't care. But they have a really big impact. And you take someone that is dedicating their life to both of those things, and they tend to stand out in a crowd of a lot of people. and have influence in a crowd of a lot of people. And because generally, those people are put in positions of authority and of leadership. Because they know what they're doing and people recognize it, you know? Unless there's a person in authority who's very I want to say sophistic, but that's not how you're saying, sophist. How are you saying the bottom one?
Sophistic.
Oh, you are saying sophistic, okay. There are people who really are really smart and not accidentally sophistic. They're on purpose sophistic.
Yeah.
There's a very large crowd that are accidentally like that. But there is a small crowd that are on purpose like that. And cause a lot of crisis for our world, you know. But right now you can see Mantic people and Suffolk people standing up, and they're really courageous and brave, and they're working really hard, but they're doing it. And whether those voices will be big enough to make sure they're big squares and not the little squares like after World War II, I don't know. But I don't know what else I have to say. I don't know how to round that out, but that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's very much, most of us are caught up unknowingly in the sophistic.
Yeah.
But there are some who have learned the tools of the sophistic to influence people into that, right? For personal benefit, for gain, for status, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
So you're right on. So what the Mantic and the Sophic people are trying to do is recognize the tools of the sophistic to sort of step back and stay out of that fray and see what's really going on so they can prepare for what's coming a little bit better and try to influence what's coming.
And the poor people that are unknowingly there, they're very hard to convince that they're there, you know?
Oh, yeah.
I don't see it, and the people that are there on purpose, they'll fight you tooth and nail to, you know, try to convince you that they're not, you know, but.
Or they try to show you a sort of a crazy person, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they paint a picture of you that
Try to minimize.
delegitimizes you as a human being a lot of times, but I don't know, you see a lot of people joining that Mantic and Suffolk crowd. Groups like this.
At the right time, right?
Yeah.
Things are lining up for us.
A lot of our kids.
Tara, what's been on your mind tonight?
Well, to be honest, I guess I sit here and I'm thinking about my class right here. That's where I'm looking, is right there, on what they're going to end up doing. And I think it's really interesting that I actually opened it up last year in my class, and I just said, because they were really negative about how they would talk about themselves as a generation. And so finally one day I just said, you know what? Forget what we're doing right now. I want you guys all to come up to the board, and I want you to write down the wonderful things about your generation that's different. Because let me just tell you, people get after teenagers. Doesn't matter where we are in the cycle, they get after your time. They were after my time when I was there. So write down those things. And a couple of them stood out to me, and I've used them since, but one of the students wrote down, we're the first generation of temple goers. And I was like, oh my gosh, that really hit me. And since we were able to have a lot of other discussions, but I'm also just thinking of my son, that every single Sunday poor kid, it's Grandma and Grandpa and me every single Sunday dinner, and he gets to listen to us all do first the come follow me in our lessons, and then we do politics. It's just gonna happen. Politics is gonna happen. And he hears us, but every single time he sits there and he goes, guys, and he's getting really frustrated right now, and he's just like, no, our generation is hopeful. He's like, he's like, we need to have more unity. We're the ones, like, if we're talking about Gathering Israel, if we're talking about Enoch, which is the theme for the youth this year, why do we keep focusing on the negative? And I think it's really interesting, especially with, not especially with, it was different with my class last year and this year, that they're feeling it. They're feeling, I see this mantic, I feel they're feeling it. I feel that's what they want. And some of them really are feeling it right now. And when they wrote it on the board, and we did it again this year, I feel like this generation, because of the spirit of Elijah or whatever, you know, I don't know. I have a lot of hope in that. I do. I really do. I feel like this generation is so powerful if they can connect it.
Yeah, their role is really powerful because unlike all the other generations, like our generations, we're more ambitious, we're more vocal, we're sort of more out in front. But we have a sunrise and a sunset, 25 years, maybe a time to influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the artist through art can influence 100 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not in the spotlight, they're more reserved, but they carry a power that none of the other three generations have.
And this would honestly be my question, because it's interesting that you said that earlier, that they're like, we're the artists, but we want to be the heroes too. Because we kind of have had that conversation, and we're going to be reading some books here soon that are about the youth in World War II. That the young boy, Jacques, who helped lead the French resistance, blind, 15 years old. You have so many young people who probably fit in that artist generation who took on a hero role. And I honestly would like to see how that kind of fits in here, because I do believe, I don't want them to feel like they can't be a hero just because, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's
Yeah.
cute that they were doing that on your board this week, because that's something I want them to see. They are heroes. And
Been
I
thinking
don't-
about that same thing, because there's a couple of boys in my class who do not want to be artists. It's like the worst sentence they could ever imagine, right? They're much more, they align much more with the hero energy, right?
mhm,
And as I was thinking about that for tonight, I realized, you know, when the generations don't fill their role, it takes, I call them statesmen, right? So it takes other generations to fill in that gap. So there probably are artists that need to be heroes because the hero generation isn't really fulfilling its role. Or they need to be prophets, which would normally be their children, but maybe they're, you know, in that next generation, because they need to compensate, I think, for a weaker generation that was before that. That makes sense?
mhm, mhm.
So, you know, George Wythe, I love that definition of a statesman or stateswoman is someone who sees the world where it is and sees the world where it should be, insert themselves in the middle, bridge that gap. So I do think there's some mixing of generations a little bit to prepare for what we really need to build. So I think you're right on.
Mhm.
Jackie, what's on your mind?
It's kind of just, you know, you revisit every time, but it's along these lines that this artist generation, then what happens when you have statesmen? What happens when you have those that are truly trained in Mantics and Sophic, that have that core foundation and are willing to lead and stand up? They're gonna have crazy influence. If the rest of their generation has some different traits or some different tendencies, or has been really overtaken by the sophistry of everything that's happening, they're gonna have a lot of influence. It feels like an incredible responsibility to prepare them, because those that are willing to stand up will have a lot more influence. Whereas when you look at some of those other generations, everybody's standing up, you know? We're all like out there, you know, we're like, let's go, you know? But I feel like in this generation in particular, if they're willing to stand, they'll have huge influence.
Yeah, so I think there are some who are figuring this out. And there are many more that are sort of stuck in here, that if they could see what this influence is, they would come here, right? So how do we expose the sophistic influence in a way that helps them sort of step out of that? Because during the crisis, the sophistic collapses on itself. It's not sustainable. It can't sustain. It's not built on any sort of foundation. So it inevitably, that's sort of what a crisis does. It gets so bad that we have to fight or survive somehow. And when that's through, we step back and say, oh, okay, how do we do this again? Because everything's sort of destroyed now. What's next? How do we come back together and restore back to original principles? So the word he uses is incredible, and I think you're reading it in two senses, right? It's incredibly big and a challenge, and it's incredibly wonderful and awesome that we have this opportunity. It's a unique time to be alive, I think.
But how do you expose the sophistic? How do you expose it so that, because it's all around them. So the natural tendency is that they're gonna just buy right into it, you know, and you see it right now so prevalent, probably more than ever before, right? At least in our lifetimes, right?
That's an exciting conclusion to next class.
Yeah.
How do we do it?
How do you expose that in a way that they don't view you as someone who's so old school, or you're not in the conversation, you know, you don't really know, you're from the olden days, you know, 1900s.
When I feel like every single time you teach truth, the Holy Ghost testifies of that truth. The Spirit of Christ testifies of that truth. And that testifying leaves an incredible imprint on your heart and on your mind and on your motivations and on your desires and on your, and I feel like, you know, those leaders who will go out and be the mantic and be the sophic and go out and teach and preach and mentor, and that they will, as they know truth and teach it and share it, that it will, I don't think we can underestimate the power of the influence that comes with that, and to do this, to bring us out of a crisis. And, you know.
There's a good case study in the Book of Mormon with, is it Alma and Korah? It's like you got both sides, sophistry on both sides, for good and bad, right?
Yep.
One's holding true to principles of righteousness and truth, and one is trying to manipulate. And I think that's a great example of what's happening right now, because you have passionate people on both sides of the scale, and the only way you know which one to listen to is if you have a reference point, which, you know, you have general conference, you have scriptures, you have.
Yeah, so when you have this grounding, this orientation, this revelation, this testimony, right, and Holy Ghost influence, combine that with the ability to reason and influence, and, you know, from a principled place, that's the really powerful combination we want to get to, right? So Isaiah says, "Come, let us reason together." So it's both receiving that revelation and then also thinking it through so it makes sense.
I just wanted to share that as we're talking, I just keep thinking of the song Amazing Grace. Was blind, but now I see.
Yeah.
And just that, I experienced, you know, a moment like that in my life. Like I started the first part of my life and I feel like most people do. I feel like mine was pretty extreme, but being raised without faith. And so I look at this curve and I think about almost like the personal awakening, the personal crisis, how that can bring someone out of the sophistic real fast. It's that bottoming out, almost that you see in the, trends of the world. You have that same thing happening inside of people that, you think of like Buddha's story and, just like they kind of like have their moment of awakening, they bottom out, and then sometimes that just happens. And so I think it's interesting to think about, like I think about my grandpa telling me stories, just like these moments of like personal crisis that can bring about the shedding of the sophistic, the collapse of the sophistic inside of oneself. And that, the big bottoming out probably causes that personal crisis for a lot of people that wouldn't have experienced it otherwise.
Yeah, very much so. There's a micro pattern in our individual lives, there's a macro pattern in society as a whole. Those don't always line up, but it's really powerful when you see that and experience it. Yeah. Jeremy, how about you?
I was just thinking about the whole curve here. You've got them all at the same level. Just because we're in it, it seems like this level is a lot lower or something.
Yeah, I sometimes,
Should we
But-
call this the last days?
Yes.
I sometimes diagram it like this. Like, and then it's like,
Right?
right?
Mhm.
But I can see that the Mantic and Sophic are what we really need to be focusing on getting back to, because that's what's gonna cause the instability to collapse.
So while the sophistic it's trying to accelerate, make life feel like it's going faster and faster, more busier, less able to just sit and connect with the Mantic, right? It's also it's also polarizing, trying to convince us to go to battle one with another. It's distorting. It's focusing on performance. Right? It's surface level. It's the facade. It's really emphasizing all those things. Trying to convince us that that's the game. It's about gain, it's about status, it's about power. So, back to your question, Jackie, what do we do, right? How do we expose the sophistic in a way that, we're not coming across as an alarmist or no fuddy-duddy here, right? We don't really know what we're talking about. And what is interesting to me is to go back and look at when really important books were written was during these times of instability. Because the classics are trying to sort out what's gone wrong with the world and show what the solution is. So the solution is coming face to face with greatness, right? It's going to the classics, finding the lesson, because the classics are pointing out the sophistry. If we have eyes to see that in them. So one of the books that we're reading right now in my class is this Lewis Carroll, Through the Looking Glass. Has anybody read that before? If you have, I'm sorry, because it's like really annoying.
Yeah, the kids were telling me. I'm like, are you so excited? They're like, what are you talking about? This is not Alice in Wonderland, Mom. Oh, well, tell me more.
So Lewis Carroll, that's his pen name, He's actually a mathematician and a logician. So he teaches at Christ Church College in England. It's part of Oxford. So mathematician, reason, logic, super important. And he writes this totally illogical and confusing book, children's book. So I've been, inviting my class. They can choose at what level they want to read this. The first level is the level of delight. Just read it at face value, enjoy the absurdity, and laugh about it. Right? There's talking eggs, and there's things that stand on their heads, and it's just everything is backwards and upside down and makes no sense. And Alice is confused the whole way through. Right? So it starts out with her. This is after her Wonderland adventure. It's the sequel. So in her living room, there's a big mirror that's up above the fireplace on the mantle. And she's just a curious person, right? So she's watching the mirror, and she realizes that everything in the mirror is completely opposite of what's in her living room, in her house. And so she imagines, what would it be like to go into that world where everything is backwards and opposite and upside down? And so that's what the story's about. She goes into the looking glass, through the looking glass, and is trying to sort out what is going on because it makes no sense, right? So at one level, you just read it as it's a children's book, and you can have fun and just enjoy this absurdity. Great. If you want to go to level 2, then think about why a mathematician and a logician would write an absurd book like this, when it's completely opposite of the way his mind works. I sense that maybe he was trying to send a message without saying what the message is. Right? What would the world be like if we lost our reason, our sense of logic and thinking things through? What would the world turn into? Right? Something like this maybe. And so you can actually see in some of his, the chapters aren't really, like, it's not really a novel that goes from place to place and there's like some connection. It's like they're little vignettes or little episodes instead of a story that's cohesive, which totally makes sense because he's not trying to write a cohesive story. So that's the next level, is to try to get in his mind and say why, other than maybe he was on drugs, why would he do this, write this way? And so I invited him to try the third level, which is actually a little bit tricky, because it takes some mental work and mental energy and some creativity. But find the symbolic in the story. What is symbolic about each episode? And one of the things that I can see is each episode is sort of exposing a different way that the sophistic is trying to operate in the world. And I'm hoping that as I'm not sure how this is going to go, but we'll find out, because I have a hard time kind of seeing through the absurdity. It's probably my engineering mind, I just can't get there. So it takes some work for me. I think they're going to be more creative and more open to seeing what I'm trying to show them. But that's really what I see the power of a classic, is any classic can be read that way, to say, what is it exaggerating? It's exaggerating to show me something. There's something symbolic in that exaggeration. And it's trying to expose, what's gone wrong in the world, what sophistic is taking over, so we can resolve that and sort of come back to the self-kinematic, is the way that I read it. So I thought we'd try that tonight, if you guys are up for an adventure or an experiment, okay? I want to read a little bit out of the book, and then try to see if we can parse out what's the sophistic element. You guys up for it?
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Okay. Might not after we're done. This story is super annoying. Let's see. She meets a character named Humpty Dumpty and has a very interesting conversation with him. So he is, we'll just read part of it. You can kind of get a little bit of his personality. He wants to try to read for us. can manage the absurdity, okay?
I can't manage the absurdity, I can just read. How's that?
No, you got it.
They gave it me. Humpty Dumpty continued thoughtfully as he crossed one knee over the other and clasped his hands round it. They gave it me for an unbirthday present. I beg your pardon, Alice said with a puzzled air. I'm not offended, said Humpty Dumpty. I mean, what is an unbirthday present? A present given when it isn't your birthday, of course. Alice considered a little. I like birthday presents best, she said at last. You don't know what you're talking about, cried Humpty Dumpty. How many days are there in a year? 365, said Alice. And how many birthdays have you? 1. And if you take 1 from 365, what remains? 364, of course. Humpty Dumpty looked doubtful. I'd rather see that done on paper, he said. Alice couldn't help smiling as she took out her memorandum book and worked the sum for him. 365, 1 minus 1 equals 364. Humpty Dumpty took the book and looked at it carefully. That seems to be done right, he began. You're holding it upside down, Alice interrupted. To be sure I was, Humpty Dumpty said gaily, as she turned it round for him. I thought it looked a little queer. As I was saying, that seems to be done right, though I haven't time to look it over thoroughly just now, and that shows that there are 364 days when you might get unbirthday presents. Certainly, said Alice, and only 1 for birthday presents, you know. There's glory for you. I don't know what you mean by glory, Alice said. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously. Of course you don't, till I tell you. I meant there's a nice knockdown argument for you. But glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument, Alice objected. When I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master? That's all.
All right,
I don't know how to make sense of all that.
just decompress a little bit.
Okay.
So he's having this conversation with Humpty Dumpty, and he has just criticized her because he's got on, she can't tell if it's a cravat, like one of those fancy scarf things that men wear, or a belt, because he's an egg. Where's his waist and where's his throat, his neck, right?
Yeah.
Right? So she's trying to figure out, is that a cravat, or, and he sort of lays into her for not knowing what a cravat is. You know, how could she tell or not know that? And he says, I got this for my unbirthday. And so Alice is confused, what's an unbirthday? I like my birthday presents, it's kind of fun once you have a birthday party. He says, well, do the math. You can have 364 unbirthday presents, or you can have 1 birthday present. Which makes more sense to you? And so at the end, she's trying to figure out, it sounds like he has different definitions of words. There's not a shared meaning between them, and there's no attempt on his part to try to establish that shared meaning, right? So read just the last 2 lines that he has. He has one that talks about, words mean what I say they mean, and then the point is,
when I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master, that's all.
okay. So she's trying to say, I don't understand how you're using words. Can we figure out how to get on the same page so I know how to communicate with you? And he's saying, that's not the point. The point is mastery or control, right? So as you're reading this, there's sort of 4 questions you can ask, right? What feels exaggerated or unrealistic? And then what human behavior is being highlighted? Where can we see that in the real world? So anything come to mind about how words, definitions have been changed or being changed? And that doesn't happen, right?
It feels like there's so much to say about that, like, what do you pick, you know?
I'll pick a sweet one that happened just now in the car with my 8-year-old boy, and he decided to try out using the word sick. Hannah and I were like, and this is a very light example, but
Okay.
anyway, we just had this conversation about like, what does that word really mean? And in our family, we know a lot of people use it. In our family, we just might not choose to use that word to describe something that's really awesome or great or wonderful, or, sorry, I'm the old lady in front of Betty. Preaching in my car.
But
It feels exaggerated or unrealistic to have a birthday 364 days a year.
Yeah.
And, like, who can maintain that? Who can even be excited about that?
It's very expensive.
Says the accountant in the room right now.
And
Or
it's
the
not-
financial genius.
Yeah. And it's not special anymore. And so it's almost like the human behavior that's being highlighted, I think, is like as if more and more and more is better. And, but we've discovered that the more and more and more you have, you feel like you're drowning. The more activity, the more possessions, the more everything, and you have birthday 365 days a year. It's like awesome, and you give gifts all the time, and then you're drowning, you're choking.
Amazon? Was that what you just said?
Yeah, and nothing's special anymore. Nothing means anything anymore, and you're operating on gimme, 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 and endlessly in order to be happy, and you're never happy. You're sadder and sadder and sadder, you know.
And, right, if you're not buying things, you're actually not very American because you're not contributing to the economy. Right? Our economy is based on how much we spend. That's how we measure whether it's
That's actually really
prosperous.
good. It keeps our economy going.
Yeah, savings bad. You're hoarding when you could be helping us, right? Go into debt to borrow something to buy something, even better, right? We'll celebrate that. So I think that's a great insight, you know, seeing that excess played out is a sophistry, right? It's a sophistic tactic. The other one is really trying to control what the definition of words are. Right?
Well, I know that it's getting really difficult for me in family situations. I think of the youth right now, that's like, how do you have a wholesome, truthful conversation when the meaning of what is real continues to change and continues to change? How can you have a conversation with Humpty Dumpty when he gets to be the one to decide what's real?
Well, if you enter into the conversation and accepting their definitions, then you've already lost. Because you're really getting sucked into the whole ploy, the whole tactic. So, you know, this classic points out, hey, here's a sophistry, right? This is going on. Where else do you see it in the world? And then what's a more measured response, right? So what would we do instead? Keep going.
Oh, no, I'm still just thinking, because Sam brought it to me today. He was talking all about it, and so I listened to Alice Adventures in Wonderland this afternoon, just listened to it. And I wish I would have thought of this, I wish I would have been there before. Like,
We haven't read through the Looking Glass, which is where this is, so.
yeah,
there's still
yeah,
time.
but it's like to have these perspectives, if I would have had that before, earlier this afternoon, going through
Yeah.
her first adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that's what's on my mind right now, but.
That's great.
But yeah, I think it's really hard for youth to go in confident, to be able to have a conversation, to be able to have impact when the language and the verbiage is all being controlled by somebody else. We can't talk about truth, we can't say it for what it really is, and it's unacceptable to challenge it and say, you're wrong. This is what truth is, you know? And I know one thing in my class that we're trying to do right now is, and last year, is definitions of words, what they meant in 1828, how they've changed. And it's scary sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes it is.
But I think you're right. I go back to, you know, what's a wise response? Step back and say, how are they using that word violence, right? They're trying to say, words are violence, words can harm. What is violence? You know, how are they defining violence? How are they defining harm? And if the person that you're talking to is willing to have a shared definition, that shows something about them that, you know, they are willing to kind of work this out. If they're not willing to, it's probably not worth the argument and engaging them much longer, right? But finding shared definitions, and then clarifying. What's the point of this conversation? Are we really trying to clarify and, you know, find what's true, or are we trying to win and decide who's right? Okay? And some of those conversations or arguments aren't worth fighting because the other persons aren't really in that mindset, right? So we step out. But pointing this out to, you know, as we're reading a story like Alice in Wonderland, a classic together, and seeing this pattern and saying, oh, you see this is going on today. He's pointing out something that could distort what's true. It could confuse. It could, you know, lead to instability. We really need to be on the watch for what's the, you know, what is this, and think of some of the words. You know, how has freedom changed? What does freedom mean today? And what did it used to mean? Or equality and equity, or even you know, critical thinking. Use that in education. But critical thinking means you can criticize some things, but you can't criticize other things. Right? So it's a really prominent trick. This is where sort of swimming. So start pointing those things out and showing the sophistry is one way to really, you know, not necessarily come across as a fighter, but just say, hey, look what they're trying to do. And where else can we see that?
I had an experience this week that highlighted to me the importance of not just truth in fact, but truth in feelings. You know, what happened, there was a group of 5 of us and we were discussing a conference talk, and one of the ladies was talking about how the person who had written that conference talk was a really hard person for her because he had been the president of Rick's College when she was there, and he was very strict. He was very, you know, he was kind of more in the line of Packard and,
Yeah.
you know, Oaks, and, you know, Bednar can kind of be like that sometimes, and, you know, I mean, black and white, very black and white sorts of talk. And, you know, and there was a consensus among 3 out of the 5 that it's like, well, the way I deal with that is I kind of, I take what I like and I kind of reject the rest of what's spoken from the top. And they like it clearly because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel validated. It makes them feel, you know, they're doing a great job. And the reason you would reject something, you know, it doesn't make me feel good, is because, well, maybe you're not doing very great at that thing, you know, or you feel some guilt there or whatever, because what else could it be, right? And I thought, okay, well, hang on a minute. I'm thinking through all of these reactions and these discussions, And I'm wholly rejecting them, you know, but I'm trying to think in my mind exactly how to verbalize why I'm rejecting it, you know? And, but one way to maybe describe that rejection is the truth in the feeling, the truth in the purpose of feelings. You know, is the point of our lives to feel good all the time? Is the point of our lives, you know, to exist in this world where every moment, every action you do is validated as good, or that's just who you are, or that's just, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
You need to accept who you are and how you are and love yourself and make yourself feel good. And if you don't feel good, go take a you day or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And reject truth because it doesn't make you feel good. You know what I mean? And to come to a common consensus of the point of feelings, the point of truth. What's its purpose? You know? And that's a thought that's been solidifying in my mind, because it's easier to define like truth in a fact. You know, men are men and women are women or something like that. X and Y chromosomes, right? It feels easier for us to define some things. Feelings sometimes feel really nebulous and much more manipulative-able.
Mhm. It's again,
You know?
it's distorting the mantic, right? So
Yeah,
the Holy Ghost works through feeling, and so the sophists come and try to distort that feeling. So what happens if, I've heard this in class, you know, what happens if, you know, you say God told you to murder somebody? What are we supposed to do about that?
oh yeah, I lost a convert almost. I did lose someone who's about to convert and get baptized to 1 Nephi 4. You know, like,
Yeah.
totally, yeah.
Isn't that the dangerous part of our crisis, is that truth is no longer universal? It's your truth now and your truth now.
It's relative.
What Jackie
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
It's relative.
All right, so we do another one?
Yeah.
So we try another one. Who wants to read this time? Empty? Okay. This is Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Between the arrows.
They were standing under a tree, each with an arm round the other's neck, and Alice knew which was which in a moment, because one of them had dumb embroidered on his collar and the other D. I suppose they've each got Tweedle round at the back of the collar, she said to herself. They stood so still that she quite forgot they were alive, and she was just looking round to see if the word Tweedle was written at the back of each collar when she was startled by a voice coming from the one marked Dumb. If you think we're waxworks, he said, you ought to pay, you know. Waxworks weren't made to be looked at for nothing, nohow. Contrariwise, added the one marked D, if you think we're alive, you ought to speak. I'm sure I'm very sorry, was all Alice could say, for the words of the old song kept ringing through her head like the ticking of a clock, and she could hardly help saying them out loud. Tweedledum and Tweedledee agreed to have a battle, for Tweedledum said Tweedledee had spoiled his nice new rattle. Just then flew down a monstrous crow, as black as a tar barrel, which frightened both the heroes so they quite forgot their quarrel. I know what you're thinking about, said Tweedledum, but it isn't so, nohow. Contrariwise, continued Tweedledee, if it was so, it might be. And if it were so, it would be. But as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic.
All right. You might want to read that last part a couple of times so we can follow it.
Tweedledee? Or do you want me to do
That's logic, right before the last. That's
Okay.
logic.
Contrariwise, if it was so, it might be. If it were so, it would be. But as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic.
I don't see any logic in there at all, but that's the point of the story, right? So what feels exaggerated?
well, they have their names for everybody to see that they've taken on themselves,
Okay.
I'm assuming.
Well, I feel like I'm gonna look at it.
I know, right? Well, I'm
Um,
stuck in her poem. I'm stuck in her little song that she heard because there's something important in the song, right? Because she's over here, they're like,
They
you
were
know,
fighting, got distracted.
yeah,
Yes?
right. They're gonna have a battle, and then this crow comes, distracts them, frightened them both so much they forgot about their quarrel. And they say, I know what you're thinking, but it isn't so.
Strong emotion.
And then he says, but if it was so, it might be, and if it were so, it would be, but as it isn't, it ain't.
Contrary-wise.
The two,
Contrary-wise.
the
Contrary-wise.
two contradict each other.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Endless conversations that sound like they're saying something but never get anywhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We see that anywhere in our world. All the talking heads on TV, or panels, or whatever that might be, right?
We were just watching the Olympics, and you just listen to the announcers, like, these guys are just babbling. They're just blah, blah, blah.
Can we hear the music for the Olympics, but not their commentary,
That's
please?
literally what happens on
Yeah.
the news. It's like blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
Yeah. So it's about being clever. It's not about coming to consensus. It's not about clarity, right? This is my position, that this is, what I believe is true. And it's not, that's not the point. The point is to show, perform, you're intelligent, you know what you're talking about. You have a case to make, and you're clever. And it's not really about what's the truth that we can find. Can we come to that place, right?
And it's not even arguable, everyone is just left being like,
What just happened?
Well, because you can't argue someone's truth. That's my truth. Who are you to dispute what my truth is?
Right? Not-
That's my definition. It's my
That's
truth.
right.
It's what I identify.
If a man's trying to argue against abortion, do you have a womb?
Yeah.
Have you ever had a baby?
Right?
What right do you have to talk about
Yeah.
abortion, right? Okay. So the wiser alternative is, how do we find clarity instead of trying to be clever? Right? Can we get beyond academic jargon? Like, there's words that we'll use to show how smart we are instead of trying to really communicate an important idea to somebody. You say these words and they sort of, reverently stop conversing with you because you're way smarter than they are. You know what all these words are. And the conversation doesn't go anywhere, right? It's a couple of ideas. Every one of the chapters in this book has a weird rule in place that if you're looking for, you can find, and start pointing out what's being exaggerated, where do we see this going on in our world, and how would we want to respond instead? And that's the power of bringing a classic classics are trying to point out the sophistry, and so if we're looking for that, we can see the lessons and use the classics, because opposite to what the sophistry is trying to do, is trying to accelerate, is trying to blur, is trying to confuse. Classics by nature slow us down, because you have to kind of slow down and think about it and work through it a little bit. So it naturally slows us down, it naturally helps us find that clarity, it naturally helps us see, expose, and then build the romantic and the sophic. So when I say face to face with greatness, the greatness is a classic book, reading together as a family, coming face to face together with that, and then using that to protect, build, and help our children, our youth, prepare for what's coming. I really build up the romantic and the sophic. it's not a set of strategies, right? Parents are looking for, well, just tell me a strategy so I can just do that and it'll fix my kids, right? It's about depth, it's about wrestling, it's about communicating and trying to find the way to express something. Not doing it very well, trying again, doing it a little bit better, right? And it's about, there's a classic word that we've kind of stopped using. It's called formation. It's another word we might use today is becoming, right? So when I was going to school and I was learning to perform, there's that root word form, right? I was performing, and so I was being formed without really knowing what was happening. It was the wrong formation. So information, education has become about information. It's informing but not forming. It's helping us know things without having the character to really wear that knowledge well. And classics help with formation, and formation is about becoming the kind of parent that our children needs to become, forming, and then also finding ways to help them form into who they're meant to become. And so they continue on, right? Their behavior doesn't change if you're in the room or if it's out, but that's kind of the real acid test. They continue acting in a way that is the right way, whether somebody's watching them or not. It's one of those indicators. Okay. Probably need to wrap up, it's getting late, so. Last thoughts or ideas? You're turning on something, Jackie, I can tell.
Well, I'm just trying to picture the kids trying to decipher this. Are you asking them those questions before they read it? Are you saying, this is what you look for? Like how do you prepare someone to read a classic that's going to clarify the distortion? Like how do you prepare in advance? Like you can hand someone a book all day long and they can say,
So
wow,
this is
that was-
probably gonna take the rest of the semester,
yeah,
but they're gonna get started. I gave them 5 weird rules to look for,
okay.
and they're pretty much throughout the book, so we'll see if they can identify those weird rules. One of them is, fact or feelings as fact, right? Where are they? Is someone feeling or emoting, and that's their reality, right? Humpty Dumpty, so we'll start to label these rules, the Humpty Dumpty rule, the Tweedledee or Tweedledum rule, the Red Queen rule. Right? So you can start to bring in examples from our world, whether it's a panel discussion, kind of show them and then connect what's happening in that story to show where the sophistries come from. So that's my intent. I'm not super confident I'll be successful at that. I'm just being honest.
Well, I hope they can decipher through the gibberish, because I'm curious if they'll get hung up on it or what they'll do with it, because you can get hung up on that. We just did.
I've been wanting to do this book for 3 years, but I haven't felt like I could. I'm sort of hoping I can, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
But most of them may just want to be at the delight level of reading, which is cool. That's why I have 3 levels. So there's a ripcord we can me too.
Try it again next year.
But I think they'll see it easier than we do,
Probably.
because they've got more of a foundation than I ever had at their age. And that's probably what's holding me back from really seeing it as much as I would want to see it, because I've got a hangover from my upbringing a little bit, right? So I was trying to work through some of those things, but I think it's gonna be fun, really interesting. My goal is for them to start seeing the sophistry in the world and start picking it out, like somebody's using a definition for that word, but it's not what I remember that. They're exaggerating it, or they're minimizing it, or they're changing it. Like equality and equity, they're just interchangeable, right? And compassion, you can just even bring in like the name that they give for laws up in Congress, right? Save America, or whatever the latest one that President Trump is. You make America great again. So if you're against that law, you're anti-American.
Affordable care.
Affordable Care Act, right? If you don't want, you're gonna vote against that law, you're not for affordable care, what's the matter with you, right? So it's sophistry at work, setting up your opponents to really look bad if they're trying to go against it, right? Or try to dig out of that. No child left behind. I mean, you really wanna leave children behind, you better sign this. Right? Those will be easy examples, kind of show the class how that's going on, actually. Anyway. I think the way to prepare for the next founding is by coming face to face with greatness in the classics and making that part of our home. They are uniquely qualified to prepare us. And it's not, it may not be a popular stand, but it's a necessary stand. It takes work and energy to really get out of those classics what you can get out. And most people, they're in too much of a rush, or don't have the patience, or just want to be told what they need to do next. And that's not the answer we're looking for. So hopefully that's not too bad news, but I think it's exciting, and I think it's energizing and fun to know that we don't have to be in that world that's sort of going crazy. It's going to collapse. We can weather that storm when we've got strong families trying to establish the Mantic and the Sulfuric in our homes. Be who can build the next family. That's my message. Okay, thanks.